What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through the top waiver wire targets heading into week 5 of the NFL season. These are going to be players that are rostered in 40% or fewer leagues using the ESPN Fantasy Football waiver wire. And to be honest, I think this is a really strong week at pretty much every single position. We have some nice running back options. Wide receiver is really strong. I think there are some nice quarterback options, some tight end plays. So I'm excited to jump right into it here. We're going to start off with the running backs. And I feel like at this point, the top pickup probably has to be Kareem Hunt. He's rostered in 21.5% of leagues. And heading into this week, I really liked Carson Steele. I thought he was going to be the guy. And he kind of was to start off the game. Like, he was playing the running back one snaps, but it just went really bad for this Chiefs offense early on. Carson Steele had an early fumble. Then the next possession, the Chiefs threw a pick. And then Carson Steele, pretty much was a non-factor. They launched Kareem Hunt into the running back one snaps, and he ends up logging 14 carries, 3 targets. At this point, it seems like he is the Chiefs running back one. And with Isaiah Pacheco's kind of return just up in the air at this point, like, he might not even come back this year. That's in the range of outcomes. I think Kareem Hunt has got to be considered the best option here because he could be the running back one. I mean, pretty much rest of season at this point. Now for this next running back, it's kind of unfortunate that I'm talking about him here because it means that Jonathan Taylor has been injured, but it is going to be Trey Sermon, pretty much widely available in every single league, rostered in only 0.8% of leagues. But we got word that Jonathan Taylor suffered a high ankle sprain. Now, it doesn't seem to be overly serious, but with a high ankle sprain, I mean, you're expecting JT to at least miss a couple of games here. And Trey Sermon is operated as the clear-cut running back too. It's not like it's been JT and then, 2 or 3 guys kind of funneling in and out. It has been JT for most of the snaps, and then it's been Trey Sermon just racking up the rest of them. So I think at this point, for however long JT is out, Trey Sermon at worst is going to be like a weekly running back too. So I think he's someone, if you need a solid start to plug in, he definitely could be that guy over at least the next couple of weeks. Then we have Emmanuel Wilson, who's rostered in 8.9% of leagues, and he is firmly working his way into this backfield. He has a 39% route participation in week 4. He took 8 of the 17 carries, and this is something that I talked about a lot heading into the season. LaFleur has a history of pushing committees, and I was getting a lot of pushback like, there's not a running back 2 here. Josh Jacobs is the clear top option. But we saw it when Aaron Jones was an amazing running back and he was splitting with A.J. Dillon. We saw it in Tennessee when he was the offensive coordinator, where Derrick Henry was in a committee with Dion Lewis. This is just what LaFleur wants to do. And Emmanuel Wilson has not been that bad, and Josh Jacobs hasn't been all that amazing. So he's worked his way into this backfield. This could turn into a 1A, 1B type of split. And at worst, Emmanuel Wilson is still like a really solid handcuff here for the Packers. The next running back, it's going to be Justice Hill, rostered in 9.7% of leagues. And I guess he's like the Derrick Henry handcuff at this point. But even with Henry healthy, he has logged 2 really legit receiving games. They're kind of tough to predict, right? Because like one seemed reasonable because it was a trailing game script against the Chiefs. But here the Ravens go out, they blow out the Bills, and he has like a great receiving day. So I don't know if he's someone that you're ever going to fully trust in your lineup, without a Derrick Henry injury. But I think he's got that handcuff upside. And then he's in that grouping where, like, if you're super desperate, bye weeks, injuries, he could be plugged into your lineup and you're just hoping it's one of those boom games from him. And then the final guy here on the graphic, Tank Bigsby, rostered in 6.4% of leagues, has a really solid day on the ground, 7 carries, 90 yards. On 21 carries this year, Tank Bigsby is averaging 8.2 yards per carry. At this point, he's Travis Etienne's handcuff, but I'm not sure that he can't work his way into somewhat of a split here, maybe even overtake Etienne. That might seem crazy, but it seems like there's like some funky stuff here going on with the Jaguars. It seemed like, maybe Tank Bigsby had already, kind of replaced Travis Etienne in this week 4 game. Etienne, they were saying he wasn't injured, but he was on the sideline with the helmet off. I don't know. There was some weird stuff going on. This team's 0-4. If they wanted to rely on Tank Bigsby a little bit more, I would not be shocked. And then just a couple of honorable mentions here. The first one is going to be Roschon Johnson, rostered in 13.4% of leagues. It was reported heading into this game that the Bears wanted to get an extended look at him. Instead, we got, I guess, some usage from Roschon, but we ended up seeing DeAndre Swift go out, have by far his best game of the season. I think one interesting development here with Roschon Johnson is that even though he didn't like overtake the snaps, he clearly was not operating as the running back one. It seems like he might have taken over Khalil Herbert's goal line role. He saw the one goal line snap, he scored, he got the touchdown. So at this point, he's more of a handcuff, but I don't think it's unreasonable to expect DeAndre Swift's production to kind of come back down to earth here. He was terrible for 3 weeks. He was good for one. That doesn't erase, the first three tough, performances from him. And then the last guy here, definitely a deeper sleeper. It's Kamani Vidal, who's rostered in 1.1% of leagues. He has been inactive all 4 weeks of the season, so he's not necessarily someone I'm like rushing to add, but it does seem like only a matter of time before he overtakes Gus Edwards as like the running back two here. Gus Edwards has 38 carries for 113 yards. He's averaging 3 yards per carry on the season. Out of 50 running backs with 18 plus carries, he is tied for the second fewest missed tackles forced with only 2. So he has carried the ball 38 times. On those 38 carries, he has forced 2 missed tackles. With Dobbins' injury history, it's not crazy to see a path where Kamani Vidal could end up being a viable start for at least like a couple of weeks of the season. If he can get into that RB2 spot, now you're just like a J.K. Dobbins injury away from being very fantasy relevant. So in a deeper league, I think Kamani Vidal is interesting. Now pivoting over to the wide receiver position, this is a fantastic week if you need a wide receiver. A lot of quality options here, both in the short term and long term. And I feel like I have to start off by talking about Dontavian Wicks. He's rostered in 9.6% of leagues. He's someone I really liked as a later round wide receiver pick, pretty much like the Packers wide receiver handcuff, where you were going to have Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, and Christian Watson leading the team in routes. But if any of those dudes went down, it would be Dontavian Wicks, who was impressive as a rookie, who would come in, step up, fill that role. And that's exactly what we saw with Christian Watson leaving early with an injury. Dontavian Wicks ends up getting targeted 13 times. He catches 5 of them for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. He is going to have starting usage on this Packers wide receiver room. And you look at Dontavian Wicks, when he's had the opportunities, the dude has gone out and produced. I think he's someone who's probably going to be ranked as like a top 36 wide receiver for me. So if he's just sitting out there on waivers, I definitely think he is a must add at this point. The next wide receiver here is going to be Xavier Legette. He's rostered in 25% of leagues, and he is someone who I talked about in my stash video a couple days ago. Someone who I thought maybe not great in the short term, but someone who could really break out later on in the season and potentially be a league winner for you. And his breakout game kind of came, even sooner than I was expecting. He had an 88% route participation. That usage took a big step up with Adam Thielen going on IR. He was targeted 10 times, caught 6 of them for 66 yards and a touchdown. This is an offense that is going to be trailing in a lot of games. There's going to be a lot of pass attempts going around here. They're letting Andy Dalton go out and rip it. The fact that Xavier Legette has already kind of earned this route participation, he had this breakout game. He's going to be the wide receiver 2 here moving forward, and he's going to have a lot of opportunities to be fantasy relevant. When these rookies break out, they show us they're good. We want to believe them. We've seen these guys have great ends to the seasons. The Rashee Rices, the Amon-Ra St. Browns. It's not always the players we're expecting that have these great rookie years or get hot towards the end. Xavier Legette's doing this early on in the season. He needs to be rostered in really like every competitive 10, 12 team league. The next wide receiver is going to be Wan'Dale Robinson, rostered in 27.1% of leagues. And this is just 4 straight weeks of him being very fantasy relevant. He's averaging 13.2 PPR points per game. His worst week has been 9.8 PPR points. He has commanded 38 targets through 4 weeks. So I feel like at this point, that's consistent production. He has to be viewed as at worst like a flex option. So definitely someone who should be rostered and someone who has proven to be playable through 4 weeks. Then we have Josh Downs, who I think is more of a short-term play. Rostered in 8.8% of leagues. I really like Josh Downs as a player. I liked him as a prospect. Thought he was interesting throughout portions of last year. He goes out, targeted 9 times, catches 8 of them for 82 yards and a touchdown. The reason, though, why I'm calling Josh Downs more of a short-term play is I only really feel like he's fantasy relevant if Anthony Richardson misses time. He is not someone who's getting the benefit of Anthony Richardson's deep passes. He's more of an underneath guy. I believe he was like a 7 ADOT in this game. And so if Flacco's the quarterback, I think he's very playable. I think he's a very strong option. But the reports now are that it doesn't seem like Anthony Richardson is going to miss a ton of time. maybe no time at all if he does miss a couple weeks. So Josh Downs, if Flacco's the quarterback, I think he's definitely a solid play. But if you need a longer term option, he's probably not your guy unless, Richardson ends up missing more time. And then the final guy here is going to be Romeo Doubs, still someone who I think is a very strong pickup, rostered in about a quarter of leagues. And he once again has led the Packers in routes run, had a 91% route participation, didn't have a big day like Jaden Reed or Jontavian Wicks, but was targeted 8 times, caught 4 of them for 39 yards. I think he's definitely someone who could be playable. You have the bye weeks, injuries. I think Romeo Doubs is still going to be very fantasy relevant, especially in matchups where you think the Packers are going to have a lot of passing volume. Now shifting over to the quarterback position, only a couple of guys here, but 2 players that I think are definitely guys you can plug into your lineup. The first one has to be Justin Fields. I think he's someone I've talked about in every single one of these waiver wire videos. He's someone I talked about as a quarterback sleeper heading into the year. He's rostered in 33.9% of leagues, and he went out, had by far his best fantasy game of the season, passed for over 300 yards and a touchdown, rushed for 55 yards and 2 touchdowns. I know the Steelers lost. I know Russell Wilson getting healthy here, but at least from my perspective, it would seem like a very questionable decision to bench Justin Fields. You just saw him nearly bring this team back. He's played fairly well through 4 weeks. I'm a Bears fan. I've seen a lot of Justin Fields. He looks infinitely better this season than really anything we've seen in his time with Chicago. He's done a fair amount with not a ton offensively. Like, this is not a good offensive line. He does not have great weapons. I know it's, probably not factoring into the Steelers mindset, but Arthur Smith has not been a good offensive coordinator through 4 weeks. He's put some Fields in, tough spots, a lot of 3rd and longs, 2nd and longs. So for Justin Fields here, I would bet on him remaining the starter. I think you look at this team, I don't know how you tell them with a straight face that with what we've seen through 4 weeks, it's going to be Russ instead of Justin Fields. And if he is the Steelers starter, he is going to be a high ceiling option and a very solid fantasy option if he is the guy. Then we have Geno Smith, who's rostered in 29.1% of leagues, and he's been a decent fantasy option through 3 weeks. We'll see him play tonight. Monday Night Football has a solid matchup against the Lions, and I think he also has a nice one week 5 against the Giants. So if you need a quarterback, Geno could definitely be your guy. Now looking at the tight end position, tight ends continue to just be rough this season, and so I think it's probably more important than ever to be getting these solid options off of the waiver wire. The top guy here is going to be Tucker Kraft, who is rostered in under 5% of leagues, and I'll give a shout out. I don't remember the person, but in my deep waiver wire stash video, someone shouted out Tucker Kraft. So if you're watching this, good on ya. His usage has been very up and down to start off the season. Coming into the year, I think a lot of people, including myself, expected Musgrave to be the tight end 1. Even if it was a split, I thought the usage would lean towards him. That is not what we saw in week 1. Tucker Kraft dominated the opportunities, the routes, everything in week 1. And so after that, it was all right, he might be the guy moving forward. But then LaFleur kind of came out, talked about how they wanted to even up that usage. And that's what we saw over the past couple of weeks. But here in week 4, Tucker Kraft dominated. 86% route participation, which at the tight end position is very, very strong. He ran the 2nd most routes on the team, only behind Romeo Doubs, was targeted 9 times, caught 6 of them for 53 yards and a touchdown. If that usage sticks on this offense, he is going to be a locked-in top 12 weekly option. And with how rough the position's been, if you can get that off of waivers, like I said, rostered in under 5% of leagues, you should definitely take advantage of that. Another guy who I think is going to be playable is Tyler Conklin, rostered in 35.7% of leagues. This was just an overall bad game for this Jets offense, but Conklin's usage was still very solid, had a 90% route participation. He was tied for the team lead with 8 targets, so he was coming off a big week 3. Didn't have a great start to the season, but Tyler Conklin, I think he's going to be relevant moving forward. And then the final guy here is going to be Taysom Hill. He's rostered in 27.2% of leagues, and Taysom Hill was one of my favorite later round tight end targets. Unfortunately, he's kind of just been hit with injury early on in the season, but he had a huge start to this week 4 game. 6 carries, 24 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was getting those goal line carries, which is something I was really looking for out of him this season. But then he leaves the second quarter with a rib injury. It's something to monitor. If he can get healthy, you can do worse than banking on a Taysom Hill touchdown. But if he's just in and out of the lineup, it's obviously going to be tough to trust him. And then the final position here, some streaming defense options. Going to start off here with the Seahawks, rostered in 36.1% of leagues, going up against the Giants. Seahawks defense has been solid. Giants offense, I know Neighbors has been the man, still very questionable. Then we have the Broncos, rostered in 5.1% of leagues, coming off a great game, I will say in bad weather against the Jets, but they're matching up against the Raiders. You have Devontae Adams week to week. Raiders offense, not super convinced they're a decent unit, so I think Broncos are interesting. Then we have the Bears, rostered in 37.4% of leagues. Just a defense that I think is very good. I know the Panthers have looked a lot better over the past couple of games, but I still think this is a solid spot for the Bears. Then we have the Patriots, rostered in 2.1% of leagues, going up against the Dolphins. Now, we'll see how the Dolphins look tonight. If they look anything like they did in week 3, I think this is a fine spot to play the Patriots. And then we have the Packers, rostered in 28.3% of leagues. Didn't do great against the Vikings here, but they're going up against the Rams. If this is a Rams team without Cooper Kupp, without Puka Nacua, I think it's a good spot to target. But that is going to wrap it up for the top waiver wire targets heading into week 5. If you have any fantasy questions, drop them down below. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.